Welcome to the Struggle Series podcast with your host, Anthony Corelli.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Struggle Series podcast. I am your host, Anthony Corelli, and tonight we do have another spooky yet intriguing short story for you. But before we get to that, we do have some special announcements that we think you want to hear. So for those of you who tuned in to our last story, we hinted at the new podcast that we have coming up entitled Grace for the Unlovable. Well, as promised, we're going to give you some details about that podcast. That podcast will begin Wednesday, April 8th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time and will continue every Wednesday at the same time. Now, the podcast is designed to help those who have made big mistakes, those who have blown it, those who have secrets, those who have done something that has caused harm to countless numbers of people. And you have nowhere to turn because maybe the behavior has ostracized you from society or from your friend group or even from your family. But you need to get it off your chest, and you've never had a place to tell it in a non-judgmental format. Well, that's what the Grace for the Unlovable podcast is designed to do. We believe that healing comes when secrets are shared in safe spaces. And so that's what we want to be. So please tune in for that. You could find it in the same places that you find this podcast. So we hope you check that out. Now, as far as this podcast goes, let's give you some more information. On Thursday, April 9th, you will hear the final short story, at least for a while, because on Thursday, April 23rd, we will begin a new novel. Now, for those of you who are new, this podcast was originally designed as a place for you to hear all 3 books in the Struggle series, and we did that. And then somewhere in there, I decided to squeeze in another book in the saga. It was only supposed to be 3, now it's 4. And so we've been doing a series of short stories until I felt that I had some direction, and I feel that I have that. Now, I'm just going to tell you, if you haven't listened to the first 4 books, listen to them, and you will understand why this next novel is completely different. This will not be a continuation of those 4 books in the saga. This will be an entirely different set of characters. It will still be paranormal and deliverance based, but it's an entirely new thing. So we're excited for it, and we hope you are as well. So I'm just going to say one more thing. If you do want to reach out to us, you have a story of your own, you need some guidance about deliverance ministry, you have some questions about the books, whatever it is, you could reach out to us at the Struggle Series podcast at gmail.com. Now, without any further interruptions, let's jump to our next story entitled, Did I Meet the Devil? How many of you would say that you have a gift where you can read people? Of course, every one of us has met somebody who just triggered something inside of us, and we somehow knew to avoid that person. But some people can walk into a room and sort out the good people from the bad people. Some people can do this with a very high level of accuracy. These people pride themselves in knowing when they have met someone with nefarious intentions. Unfortunately, no matter how accurate they may be, no one can truly know with 100% accuracy. I bring this up because I wonder if you've considered that you may have actually met someone who was possessed by a demon. How would you know? Even if you have a gift of discernment, would you always know? Let's take it a step further. Would you know if you met an actual demon in disguise? Can demons change their form? I'm not saying I believe they can, but I'm just asking questions. Let's go even further still. Can the devil himself change his appearance as he roams earth? If so, does he interact with people in a deceptive human form? How would we know? We hear stories of people selling their souls for fame and fortune. Of course, we can argue all day about whether a person can actually sell their soul. But with that being said, we seem to be able to make deals with evil entities for power if we simply turn from God. So stop and think. Have you ever met Satan and didn't realize what you were interacting with? Let's tune into a story of a man who repeatedly saw the same man throughout his life. Troy was a 35-year-old man who recently broke up with his longtime girlfriend. Troy had never been married. As a matter of fact, he had never really had a long lasting relationship until he met Irene. They had been together for 3 years. Troy really wanted this relationship to work, but it had fallen apart. He was devastated, but he saw it coming. His job required him to be gone in the evenings, and there were nights where he didn't come home at all. Most women could not handle this type of relationship. He would constantly cancel dinner plans and rarely show up on time. It was natural for the women he dated to begin to suspect him of infidelity. He had never actually been unfaithful, but it made sense that his lifestyle was suspicious. Breakups in the past had not really affected him. This one did. He loved Irene, and he begged her to stay. She lovingly explained that she loved him dearly, but she deserved a normal life. Troy was heartbroken and actually considered leaving his job. He just couldn't. He had invested everything he had in his career. It is what defined him. It made him feel alive. He worked in intelligence. He had a very high security clearance, and his job was to surveil bad guys. If he was on a case and his mark was on the move, he had to stay until he gathered all relevant information. If he had dinner plans at 6 p.m., but his mark was meeting with other bad guys, Troy had to stay until that meeting was over and the information was secured. He imagined what it was like to be Irene, getting dressed up, putting her makeup on, and sitting in the living room, checking the time while she waited, eventually realizing that he was not coming home anytime soon. No wonder she decided to end it. A few nights after the breakup, Troy actually had the night off. His initial plans were to sit at home and lick his wounds. His heart was broken, and the idle time was messing with him to the point where he knew he had to get out and do something. Troy decided that he would head out to his favorite sports bar and have a few beers and watch a hockey game. It was within walking distance, so he grabbed his wallet and headed out the door. He had to get out of his own head and distract himself from the heartbreak. He pulled up a seat at the bar and ordered a beer and some hot wings. He had a great seat in front of a large television. The game was exciting, and soon he had forgotten all about Irene. At the end of the first period, a man came up to the bar and took a seat 2 down from Troy on his right. Troy glanced over at the man and then did a double take. He didn't know this person offhand, but the man looked eerily familiar. The man gave a smile that seemed to touch his soul. It was the strangest feeling. The man turned away and ordered a drink from the bartender. Troy racked his brain trying to figure out where he knew the man from. It slowly began to consume him. How could somebody be so familiar, yet Troy had no idea who he was? Several times, Troy looked over at the man, trying not to be noticed, but wanting to get a good look at his face. Each time he stared at the man, he became even more sure that he had not only seen him before, he had seen this man several times in his life. Troy just kept dipping his wings in ranch dip as he excavated his mind trying to figure out who this person was. He could not figure it out. Finally, Troy took one last glance. Even though he tried to be discreet, the man saw him look. The man said, "Hey man, I'm starting to think that you keep staring at me. Do we know each other?" Troy said, "I'm sorry, sir. I just can't help but think that I've seen you somewhere before. I just can't seem to place where I might know you from. Well, Troy, I definitely know who you are. I can understand that you might not know who I am formally, but I bet if you think hard enough, you'll figure out who I am. I knew I wasn't crazy. I'm usually good at faces and names, but for some reason, I can't place where I know you from. In that moment, Troy had a thought. Is he somebody who I've surveilled in the past? Wait, that can't be. He wouldn't know who I was. That can't be it. The man said, I think the reason you can't place where you know me from is because I try and stay behind the scenes. I know so many people, but most of them have the same problem as you do. They just can't put their finger on who I am. Again, I try to stay out of the spotlight. Well, sir, as much as you look familiar and definitely know my name, I don't know if I can guess who you are. So let's just make this a normal conversation so I can stop feeling so awkward. What is your name? The man said, I will eventually give you my name, but I'm having way too much fun with this. Don't give up so soon. Let me give you a. Troy was somewhat annoyed, but he decided to go along with it. He said, Okay, I'll play along. Give me that hint. The man said, Do you remember Gary Stevens? Troy's heart stopped instantly. Troy did know Gary Stevens. He had tried for 25 years to forget Gary Stevens. He didn't know if he should get up and leave or stay and ask questions. He chose the latter. Troy said, How do you know Gary Stevens? There was a fear in Troy's voice when he said it. The man took a sip of his drink and said, Don't you remember, Troy? I was there. Troy's mind almost exploded. The memory of Gary Stevens was one that had played over and over in his mind thousands of times. He remembered George and Tommy being there. He remembered the conversation they had afterwards. Nowhere in his memory was this person there. Troy's mind was spinning. Troy said, Wait, is this a joke? Are you related to Gary or something? I know you weren't there. So tell me who you are and what this is about. The man said, I can assure you, Troy, I was there the whole time. You know what we did. Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. Troy wanted to be angry, but he felt his control slipping away. How did this man know about Gary? If he did know about Gary, then this man had power over Troy. Troy was both angry and panicked. Troy's mind drifted back to the day that he, George, and Tommy had their interaction with Gary. It was a day that Troy was profoundly ashamed of. Not ashamed enough to confess to the crime, but ashamed that he would participate in something like that. One day when Troy was 10, he and his friends were out riding their bikes when Gary rode by. Gary was an awkward child with no friends. Troy and his crew decided to mess with Gary that day. They asked poor Gary Stevens if he wanted to play with them. Of course, Gary gladly accepted the invitation. The boys lured Gary out to the woods to an overturned tree where they hid out from the world. They teased Gary for several minutes, but Gary was probably unaware of what was happening. Then Troy had an idea. He said, Hey, Gary, if you really want to be part of our crew, you have to jump over this tree with your bike. You start at the top of the road, build up speed, and then hit that little dirt hill right there. It's like a ramp. You will jump right over the tree. We've all done it. It's kind of like our initiation. Gary was obviously terrified. The boys provoked him over and over, telling him that he was a sissy and that he could not be in the club unless he jumped the tree. Eventually, Gary decided to take the challenge. The poor kid never had a chance. He went to the top of the hill, built up speed, and tried to jump the tree. He actually cleared it. When his front tire hit the ground, Gary flew over the handlebars and flipped in such a way that he landed on his neck. Gary's spinal cord was severed and he never regained consciousness. He lived for 3 years in a coma before he finally died. The boys made a pact to say that they were just hanging out when Gary came rushing down the hill on his bike. They said he must have been out of control when he hit the dirt hill and flew off his bike. The boys were not only believed, but were considered heroes for trying to help Gary. It was actually unfathomable that 10-year-old kids could lie like that, but they did. The boys remained friends through high school. When Gary died, they didn't grieve. They all breathed a sigh of relief. Countless times in his life, the memory of that day popped into Troy's mind. He would simply distract himself and move forward. Troy even remembered when he took his polygraph to gain his top secret clearance. They had asked him if he had any crimes in his past that he had never been held accountable for. Troy had buried his conscience so far down that he easily passed the polygraph. Now, Troy was sitting in a bar with a man who obviously knew the truth. He wanted to lash out, but somehow he knew that this would only make it worse. Instead, he said, "How do you know that?" The man said, "I told you, I was there. Remember when we talked that weird kid into trying to jump that tree? I still can't believe he tried it. You're lucky I was there to help you guys come up with the story because you three idiots would have folded under pressure." Troy gritted his teeth and tried to be quiet as he said, "You weren't there. I would have remembered that. How do you know about Gary? Are you like a relative or something?" The man said, "Calm down, Troy. We're getting there. Let me give you another hint. Do you remember Lisa Crow?" Troy felt the room start to spin. He felt like he was going to fall off the bar stool. He said, "Wait, what? You know Lisa? How do you know Lisa? Don't you remember when we came up with that idea to sneak up to her window at night and take those pictures? I remember it vividly. We were so careful to camp out across the street at that park and learn her family's schedule. We were so patient. Once we knew her routine, we snuck up and snapped those pictures of her. She was beautiful. I don't blame you for wanting something that would help you to remember her. How long did you keep those pictures anyway? You don't still have them, do you? If you do, you probably better get rid of them. That's evidence, my friend." Troy was speechless. Who was this person? Had the agency figured out about his past through their background checks? Were they now trying to hold this over his head to get him to agree to some impossible mission? Troy finally broke the silence and said, "Okay, they obviously dug up some dirt on me. They sent you to show me that what you're going to ask me to do next is non-negotiable. That must be where I know you from. I've probably seen you all over the agency." The man laughed and said, "I can assure you, Troy, that's not why I'm here. Let me give you another hint. Remember that one day when we were sitting in that funeral home for your mother's services? You really loved her. I don't blame you. She was a good woman. Remember when you sat there looking at the cross? Remember when you cursed God that day? I was at that funeral. I couldn't hear you talking to God, but I saw the look on your face. I know you cursed him that day, didn't you, Troy? I knew your family better than anybody there. I knew how much your mom protected you from your father. What an awful human being that guy was." Troy wanted to punch the man. How dare he bring up his mother's death? The man seemed to sense the tension. He said, "Come on, Troy. Why are you getting upset? Am I wrong?" He let Troy think without pushing forward. Troy said, "How does the agency know these things? I wasn't even thinking about joining back then." The man said, "Troy, you're getting tunnel vision. Don't get distracted. Trust me, my friend. You know me better than you think you do. Listen, I know you have these things in your past. I'm not like that God that your mother worshipped. I'm not judgmental of your behavior. If anything, I might be one of the only people that understands. I know why you immerse yourself in your work. You have things you're trying to hide. I know you took that job so you can serve your country and prove to everyone that you're a good guy. I don't think less of you. I know the real you. You can be yourself around me, Troy. Here, I'll prove it to you. Remember that drug house you were surveilling on 7th Avenue in Denver? Troy wanted to run, but he was frozen. The man continued, remember those late nights when we mapped out a plan to go in and take all that money? That was the perfect plan. To this day, no one knows that it was you that took that money. Well, I guess I shouldn't say a perfect plan. It was perfect until the drug dealer came home and saw that his money was gone. I mean, he drew the obvious conclusion. His wife was the only one in the house when the money went missing. I mean, you were there, but nobody knows that. Remember when we were watching on surveillance when we saw the guy come in and murder his wife like that? The team had to move in. Thankfully, they arrested that monster. He was an animal. But his poor wife got the blame for what you did. You know what? That's what she gets. Why would she be so stupid to marry a guy like that in the first place? So many of these girls want to be with bad boys. The way I see it, it's a risk that she took. It's kind of her fault, really. Troy sat on the stool, defeated. He knew that whatever the agency was going to ask of him, he could not refuse. He said, okay, you've proven your point. What is it that they want me to do? The man said, look at me, Troy. I'm not here for that. I'm here for you. When Troy looked at him, he no longer saw the well dressed, attractive man that he had been conversing with. He saw a monster. Troy gasped at the man's appearance. Then, like a lightning bolt, it hit him. There was no way the agency could know these things. Yet, this man had detailed knowledge of the secrets of his life. Troy had tried so hard to pretend to be a good guy. In all reality, Troy was not a good man. He had committed some heinous crimes that he had gotten away with. His facade was crumbling. Troy was jolted back to reality by the man's appearance. This was not a human being. This was, before Troy could think the name in his mind, the man said, there you go. Now you know who I am. Troy began to cry. He was actually talking to Satan. The words, I'm here for you, rang in his mind. Then he felt a sharp pain on his left side. His arm went numb. He collapsed to the floor. As he tried to stay conscious, he looked up to see the man who was no longer trying to hide his identity. The monstrous beast smiled a huge smile. That was the last thing Troy saw on Earth, but it wasn't the last time he saw that face. When the camera footage in the bar was reviewed by the police, they saw Troy sitting alone at the bar, seeming to talk to the empty stool to his right. The police did not pursue it further. The death was an obvious heart attack, even if the man who had it was talking to nobody right before his death. Of course, he wasn't talking to nobody. He was talking to the great accuser. So, there you have it. That story is entitled, Did I Meet the Devil? Now, I want you to consider a lot during this story, but what I don't want you to do is immediately go down the path of the theology of whether or not Satan could appear as a human or demons could do that. We'll get to that in a second. What I want you to do is think about the times in your life when you've made decisions that you felt almost as if you were wrestling and then you lost the battle. And then you, of course, made a bad decision and then you paid for the consequences. Was there somebody in your ear, or should I say something in your ear, trying to guide you towards the bad decision? Remember on this podcast and the previous podcasts that we've done, we've often talked about how you determine between the voices in your head. You know, the voice telling you to do the right thing, probably the Holy Spirit. The voice telling you to do the wrong thing, probably a demon. The voice that's trying to negotiate between the two thoughts is probably you. And it literally could be that simple. But, even in the nuance, I think you can look at this and say, you don't really have to have a dilemma about doing the right thing. It's like I've used the example before. If you work 80 hours every 2 weeks, there's nothing in you that has a dilemma about cashing your paycheck on payday. You cash it and pay your bills because you took the job to get paid to have the money to pay your bills. There's never a dilemma on Friday about going to cash your paycheck, right? Well, the same thing would apply if you're trying to do something that you know is the right thing. Now, if you want to get a little more detailed, you can look at it like this. When you're having that dilemma, it's usually something trying to convince you to do the wrong thing, or it's somebody trying to convince you, or something trying to convince you not to do what God wants you to do. So in those conversations, you can kind of determine. Now, let's jump into the theology of whether a demon or the devil himself could represent themselves to be something else. You know, that's something that I'm not really going to answer. Remember, in the Bible, it says real plainly that, there might be times where we're entertaining angels unaware and we don't realize they're angels. So we know that angels could come down and look like people, right? So could demons or fallen angels, or you see, that's a complex conversation. And I'm actually not going to give you the answer. I'm not going to tell you what I think the right theology is. I want you to study that on your own. But the deeper meaning of this story, and I'm kind of sneaking my little sneak attack on you, I'm going to reveal it now. I wrote this story as a way to kind of transition us into the Grace for the Unlovable podcast. Remember, we talked about that podcast being one that exists to help people who have made horrible decisions to get their story out there and find the road to redemption and restoration. You see, what if Troy would have had the ability to talk about his sins of his past, his horrible mistakes that literally led to somebody's life being taken and to somebody being spied upon in a creepy way, and for him to literally break the law on his job for his own gain? Like, what if he had the ability to tell that story without being judged? Because not only was he keeping the secrets which were eating him alive, which may have led to the heart attack which took him, and Satan may have simply had knowledge that that was the day that he wasn't going to make it and he came to collect him. See, we don't know that. But what if Troy would have had the ability to speak to somebody, get it off his chest, confess it, and find the redeeming grace of Jesus Christ? Would any of this happen? See, we don't know. But what I do know is that secrets keep you sick. And on all of our podcasts, in our organization in general, we believe that healing comes when secrets are shared in safe spaces. And that's what the new podcast will be about. So what I'm hoping is that some of you have listened to this podcast and you've said, I have a story of my own and I don't know where to share it, but I'd be terrified that somebody would judge me. Well, the new podcast is that place. We're not there to judge you. We're not there to point out that you've sinned. You know you have. It's been eating you alive for days, weeks, years, decades, who knows? But what if you had a place to share it anonymously, where you wouldn't be judged, where not only would you be listened to, but you would have the opportunity to find healing, to find freedom. And we believe that comes through, again, the redeeming grace of Jesus Christ. So if you have a story of your own, please reach out to us. We can read it as a letter on the podcast. We could do an interview with you on the podcast, or we could simply just talk to you anonymously without you ever being on the podcast. We're here for that. We just want people to shed that feeling of being unlovable. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. but some of us just don't know how to get to that grace. And we're here for you. Again, want to remind you that this podcast is going to have one more short story, and then we're going to move into the next novel. So keep listening. We're going to have our next short story on the 9th of April, and then on the 23rd, we're going to start the next adventure. And if you are interested, don't forget that on the 8th of April, that's when we start the journey known as the Grace for the Unlovable podcast. So please tune in for that. Again, remind you that this podcast is written, narrated, and produced by me, Anthony Corelli. This podcast is copyright The Struggle LLC. Shout out to Todd Kazinka at Todd K Voiceovers. Again, reach out to us at the Struggle Series Podcast at gmail.com. Again, if you want to find out more about us, you could visit thestruggleseries.com. That's our website. A lot of information on there for you to figure out who we are and what we do. Thanks again for listening, and may God bless you and bring you peace.
Thank you for listening to the Struggle Series podcast. Please like, subscribe, and tell a friend. We will see you next time.